Let's open up our Bibles to Philippians. We're going to close up your series. I've heard that you guys have been going through the book of Philippians, so we're going to open up to chapter 4, verse 10. I'll give you guys a couple seconds to get there, and then we will jump into that. Let me move this real quick. Philippians 4, verse 10. All right, let's start reading. Ooh. I'm a robot. Just kidding. Philippians 4:10 says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstance. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. And I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Let's go ahead and pray. God, thank you so much, Lord, for everything you're doing here at the junior high ministry. God, we are so thankful for each and every one of the people here today, God. Lord, right now we just ask that you would remove the distractions from our life, God, that these next couple of moments we could completely just focus in on what you have to speak here today. Lord, would you open our hearts and would you open our ears that we might receive that message, God? Lord, we love you and we thank you so much, and we pray this in your name. Amen. Awesome. Have you guys ever been, expected to act some sort of way? Like you were at, a wedding, or maybe, I hope not, but at, a funeral or something, where your parents, had to sit down with you beforehand and say, hey, listen, I need you to act this way. Have you guys ever been there? A couple of you? Awesome. I went to a wedding once, and that was they're like, hey, Sean, I know you like to mess around, and you can go 5 minutes before you destroy something, but we need you to not do that today. And I lasted 5 minutes, and then I destroyed something. Just a little insight of who I am. You're like, wow, that guy runs a ministry, and he just is reckless as heck. I don't even remember what I broke. Something. But there's another situation in my life where I was expected to act some kind of way. Now, for some of you, most of you probably don't know this, but I work at a Starbucks as well. Yeah, right? Unicorn Frappuccino? Come talk to me. I'll get you one. It's it's made out of unicorns or something like that. I don't know. They don't tell me. Dude, it's a coffee place. But I work there. I serve coffee. I make coffee. And normally there's a 30-minute window where everyone decides to show up and get coffee. And for that 30 minutes, 40 minutes, however long, you're just nonstop making coffee, whatever it is that day that you're making. However, this particular day, for some reason, this rush decided to last for 2 hours. Not exaggerating, literally nonstop coffee making for 2 hours. I'm setting a world record right now for how most coffee made in 2 hours ever. And in the process of this, it's a very, you're running around, you're hitting buttons, you're pulling levers, you're foaming milk and doing all kinds of stuff. And I'm getting a little bit tired. And when I get tired, I get a little frustrated with people, especially people that are hey, I don't like this drink. It's not the right temperature. And I'm like, hey, you know what? Leave me alone, all right? At least I made it, okay? But I'm getting a little frustrated. I'm getting a little tired. And then my boss comes up to me. She taps me on the shoulder. She's like, hey, she starts pointing out everything I'm doing wrong, okay? Because I'm a little tired now. I'm making mistakes like a normal human being, all right? I'm proud of my mistakes, all right? So I'm making these things, and she's telling me everything I'm doing wrong, so I'm getting more frustrated than normal, all right? And then she pulls this stunt. She taps me again. She goes, hey, Sean, you're not smiling enough. And I was like, okay, for real? You're going to tell me I'm not smiling enough right now when you are the sole source of why I'm not smiling right now? Okay, lady, Laura. Yeah, I said her name. Whatever. So she starts telling me I'm not acting happy enough. And I'm in this very tired and, frustrated state of mind to the point that she pulled me to the back and was like, Sean, if you're not happy enough, I'm going to send you home. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? That sucks. And I had this, expectation that I had to be a certain amount of happy at this given moment. Have you ever been in that spot where you're, your parents are like, hey, you better wipe that frown off your face. And you're like, I'm frowning because of you. And you have that, moment where you're this, expectation is not realistic at all. I think a lot, school, oh my gosh, don't get me started on school. But I think a lot of times we look at this and we have this expectation or this idea in our minds that as Christians we have to constantly be happy. That as a Christian I live a perfect life, and that now that God's in my life there's sunlight and flowers, and God just gives you hugs all the time. And that's like what being a Christian is. We get this expectation that as a Christian, I have to be this way all the time. Now, I didn't grow up a Christian. I found God when I was a senior in high school, and that's where it started for me. And for like the first 3 months, I was like, wow, this is rad. And like I was living that like God hugs me all the time lifestyle, where I was just like constantly happy and constantly stoked and learning all these new things and like being brought into the church. And then a couple of months into that, I realized that was not the reality of what being a Christian is. That there is not just this constant happiness that's always happening. I found out that 3 months into my faith that my family doesn't like God. They actually would say they're really like mad at him, and they're not like a fan of him at all. And that was very difficult for me to be in this family where I was constantly being challenged and constantly being questioned with these questions that made me doubt God. And I started to get like frustrated with it for a little bit. And then on top of that, my mom is not able to walk. She has no mobility in her legs. So like I'm now wrestling with these new questions in my life of like, well, God, what's up with that? How come she can't walk? And then to top that off as well, like if it wasn't worse enough, she also got diagnosed with cancer a couple years ago. And now I'm wrestling with this as well. Where I've had these moments in my life where the expectation of this like perfectly happy Christian wasn't like a reality anymore. And I think, like I said, a lot of the times as Christians, we believe this to be true, that as a Christian, I constantly have to be happy. And we take these emotions, and for some reason, we think that like it's incorrect to think those things. And I think if I could say anything here today that you could walk away with is that is not true. That as Christians, we have been designed with these emotions. As Christians, these are real, and these are very, like, God is ready to receive those. And that's going to be our first point here today. If you open up one of your Fuel 910 bulletins over there, the first point that we're going to see there is we are not expected to be happy all the time. We are not expected to be happy all the time. As you guys are filling that out, a couple verses for you. Romans 12:15 says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep." Showing that, yes, there's a time to celebrate, and there's a time to get up and worship God and to praise his name. But there's also a time to get together and to share your struggles. That there is a time to cry. Ecclesiastes 3:4, it says, "A time to weep and a time to laugh and a time to mourn and a time to dance." That there are different seasons in our life where these are emotions, they're okay to have. They're okay to have. That in my life, I've dealt with frustration and anger and sadness and like those times of mourning. And that God is saying, listen, that's okay. I made those. I want those. I want to hear that from you. And in fact, he even goes on to say, listen, these are just 2 verses in the Bible that I took. There's multiple times that God is saying, listen, pour your heart out to me. There's a couple stories in the Bible. Maybe you've heard of Elijah. Elijah, he was being obedient, and he did what God called him to. And in result, the people that were like, I guess you could say, opposing him, they said, hey, listen, you crossed the line, and we want you dead. And they began to pursue him, and they began to chase after him, and he ran out to the desert to go hide himself. And in the midst of that desert, he calls out to God. He says, God, listen, I'm scared. I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Would you just take my life? Would you just end it all? And you're like, wow, that's a very emotional moment right there. That's a very real prayer to God right there. And in response, God doesn't go, wrong sentence. You were supposed to say, hey, God, I'm so happy people are trying to kill me. No, God says, listen, I understand. And he provides food for him. And he provides water because he's in the middle of the desert. And he says, listen, take a nap. Wake up, we'll figure it out. And God responds to those emotions. He says, listen, I got you. I understand. We see multiple prayers from Moses as he's walking through the desert that he just calls out to God in frustration. He says, listen, God, I'm sick and tired of the people I'm with. I don't want to be with them anymore. They never listen to me. And he's just calling out these like frustration, like prayers out to God and this anger that he has in him. In Job, we see Job just calling out to God saying, God, I don't get why I'm here. I don't understand why everything I had was gone. I'm bummed. These are very real and like sad prayers that he's calling out to God. And I think one of the most like significant and like just impactful stories that we can read about is that Jesus in the garden. that before he goes to the cross, he sits in the garden 3 different times and he calls out to God and he says, listen, God, I don't want to do this. I'm afraid of this. Is there any other way that we can complete this process? I don't want to go to the cross. We see that in that moment that Jesus calls out in this fear. And he says, God, I don't want to do this. These are very real, emotional prayers. From even Jesus himself, we see that. And yet for some reason in our minds, we've pent up this idea that as a Christian, I have to be perfectly happy all the time. When in reality, God's saying, listen, there's going to be things in your life that are going to challenge you and bring those to me. And I think a little trap we can get stuck in as we're going in Philippians is that we can read Paul's letters and that we can see him, talking about all of this positivity while he's in prison. And you're like, yo, this guy's crazy. Why is this dude stoked to be in prison right now? And we forget that Paul is on another level. That Paul is something different in this moment. And he even mentions it. So our next point is going to be that contentment is a learned attitude. Contentment is this word that Paul uses to kind of describe his current feelings. That though he is in prison, he says, listen, I'm good. I'm good. I'm okay with this moment right now. Contentment is a learned attitude, and he says that as well. He says, listen, I have learned how to be content. I've figured this out through time. It's not like as human beings, this does not come natural to us. When my mom called me and she said, Sean, listen, I just got back from the doctors. I've been diagnosed with cancer. I wasn't like, sweet, I bet everything's going to be okay. No, immediately in my mind, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid. I don't know what's going on right now. What's happening? Is she going to be okay? What's the next couple years look like? All of these thoughts came to my mind. Contentment doesn't come natural to us, but how many of you guys are video game people? You like video games? Where are my video game people at? Come on. Yes. I wish I still had time for video games. There are so many good ones out there right now. But I remember we'll go to junior high. I remember in junior high, I think Skyrim was becoming a thing. Maybe it was high school. But I don't know. Something about swinging a sword at a dragon really got me going. I was like, yes. Dragon, dead. That was my jam. I love Skyrim. And I like those RPG games where you create a character, and as you go through, as you gain more experience, you have an option to choose what you want to add experience to. So in those games, you could increase strength or intelligence, and I was like, strength, obviously, and my guy had 0 intelligence, so we accomplished nothing all the time, but I was super strong. But you could increase your strength or your different attributes or your defense or whatever. And I think in the same way that as we go through trials and as we gain more experience in life, we have this opportunity to say, God, I trust you, and to increase our contentment. That as different things come our way, whether it be big or small, maybe it is family sickness or some kind of divide in your family. Or maybe it's something small like a very stressful semester in school every semester. Constant studying and constant tests and homework that just doesn't make sense. And you're just frustrated in school. Or maybe it's just some kind of difficulty in a friendship. That in each of these experiences, we have an opportunity to say, God, I trust you, and to increase our contentment and to learn more about it. And this is Paul. Paul's saying, listen, I've gone through a lot of stuff. And in these moments, I've learned how to be content. This is not something that just came to me, that I was just born with being okay with everything. I've had to learn how to do this. And I think as we sit here, that should be something we ask ourselves. Maybe you're currently in something, or maybe, you haven't been, and that's okay, but take this opportunity to be prepared for it if something is to come your way. Or maybe someone's going through something that and you can help them in that. But I think we can look at a couple practical things that Paul does here that we can learn from. There should be a little fill-in. It says, how do we get there? And there's a couple little points in there. I'm going to add another one, plot twist. Sorry I didn't say in the rule book. But the first one we're going to look at is that Paul had a closeness with Christ. Paul had a closeness with Christ. That he even mentions, he says, listen, I can do this simply because of Jesus, because of the God that I follow. I can do this because I still have him in my life. A lot of athletes love to use this verse, and they love to rep it as I could hit a baseball really far. But in this moment, Paul's talking, listen, no matter the circumstance in my life, I can get through it. Because I have God with me. Now, for some reason as Christians, it's probably just our broken hearts and our broken nature, is that when trials and seasons come our way, we like to start blaming God, and we like to start questioning and pointing fingers at him, saying, listen, this is your fault. And we start to push ourselves away from him. We start to move away from him, but God's saying, listen, no. Pull me closer than ever. John 15, 1 through 8. I'll read it for the sake of time. You guys can write it down if you want to check it out later. John 15, 1 through 8. It says, I am the true vine. This is Jesus talking to the disciples. And it says, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. And if you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. And if you remain in me, my words will remain in you. Ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. We see Jesus talking to the disciples and saying, listen, no matter what comes your way, no matter what it is that comes your way, remain in me. Stay close to me. He says, listen, people that go far from me, people that step away from me in these times, they can do nothing. He describes them as like a dead tree branch, capable of producing nothing. And they say, listen, we just throw those away. Those get thrown into the fire because they can do nothing anymore. But he says, listen, hold me close in these times. And this is what Paul is doing. He's in the middle of a prison, probably wrestling with thoughts of, listen, this is going to be the reality of my life. I don't know how much more life I have. I'm under Roman rule. They don't like the God I follow. And all of these thoughts, and he's saying, listen, but God, let me hold you closer than ever. And he says, this is how I can be okay with this moment. It's because I still have God in my life. And our next one, that when we remain close with God, we are reminded of who he is. That's going to be the next one, that remind yourself who he is. Remind yourself of the God that you follow. I remember in my times of trouble, one of the biggest things that I was reminded of was that Jesus is referred to as the Prince of Peace. The Prince of Peace. Isn't that such an incredible title for the God we follow? That despite our current difficulties, whether it be school or illness or whatever it is, that he has peace in that moment and that we can come to him and seek that peace. I was also reminded that our God is incredibly powerful. That I was reminded of the story of Jesus walking on water, that he was capable of things that we have labeled impossible, that we have proven impossible. Yet Jesus is walking on water. I was like, oh my, our God is incredibly powerful. Also that while on the Sea of Galilee, in this big storm, the disciples are freaking out. They're like, oh my gosh, we're going to die. These waves are going to kill us. Jesus is sleeping. And a lot of us are like, well, what the heck? Why is he sleeping while we're like freaking out? Because he's not worried about what we've called storms. Jesus isn't just really tired in that moment and like somehow not waking up. He's just not worried. He says, listen, I understand that I control these waves. And in fact, when he wakes up, he does. He says, he calms them. He demands them to stop, and they stop. That whatever your current difficulty or whatever it is that your current struggle, God oversees it and says, I'm not worried by that. And when we remind ourselves of that, we remind ourselves of the God that is overseeing it. And lastly, in that little box, that when we remind ourselves who he is, we remind ourselves of what he's promised. Go ahead and write that one down. We remind ourselves of what he's promised. When we remember who he is, we're reminded that he has promised us that in all things, I will make good of them. In Romans 8:28, we read that it says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have called according to his purpose. I love that it doesn't just say, hey, in some of the things in your life, just a few of them, I'm going to do good things in them. He says, no. In everything, whether big or small, I am doing something good in it. I am creating good in this moment. How assuring is that? Is that no matter the circumstance in our life right now, he is doing something good in it. No matter what it is, God is saying, listen, I'm working it to be good. And I think when we start to understand that, and we remind ourselves of that promise, how much easier our troubles are to go through. That right now, no, my mom still has cancer, and she's still not able to walk, and my family is still far from God, but I understand that in the midst of all of this, God is doing something good. And I think Paul understood that. He said, listen, I'm in prison right now, and I'm away from the people that need to hear God, but I'm going to do something. I know that God is doing something right now. I understand that my current situation sucks, but I know that God is still doing something good. So I'll continue to praise him. I'll also continue to rejoice in him. And our last point is to return to joy. Return to joy. I love that Paul uses two very key words in this passage. He uses the word rejoicing, which we'll get to that in just a sec, but he also uses that word contentment. He says, listen, I've learned the secret to contentment. And if we're to look at the definition of that word, it means to be free from care because of satisfaction. To be free from care because of satisfaction. That Paul wasn't just immune to the emotions that came with his current situation. He had just figured out a way to deal with it. That those feelings of fear and anxiety and probably stress and loneliness still existed in his life. He just learned how to be content in the midst of it because of where he found his satisfaction. Remember, that's in Jesus. That's in Christ. That's in God. That he found his contentment in that he placed his joy in God. That he placed his satisfaction in God. That he was able to sit inside of a prison cell alone, away from the world, under people who hated him, and say, I'm good. In fact, I'm joyful right now. That he could write one of the happiest letters ever written, and probably one of the worst situations ever, and say, listen, I'm good. I'm aware that my God is still overseeing this. He is still in control, and he's doing something good right now. So because of that, I'm going to rejoice. And I love that word rejoice. If you break that apart, to return to joy, that Paul was dealing with those emotions. He had that fear, but he came back to joy. Every time he said, listen, I understand that my situation sucks, but I'm going to go back to God, and I'm going to praise him because I know he's doing something good right now in this moment. So I think if I could challenge you guys as you leave this room today to do something different, is that maybe you're dealing with something. Maybe you have some kind of difficulty in your life right now. Maybe you've gone through one, or maybe, one's right around the corner. Is that when those things happen, that you not distance yourself from God, but bring him closer than ever, and remember who he is. And remember that he has promised a great outcome in it. And that looks different sometimes for us. That God's definition of a good outcome may be very different than what we think. But he's promised goodness in it. So let's go ahead and pray, and then you guys are more than welcome to hang out. Come talk to me if you want to. If you have any questions, I would love to answer those, or find another leader. But let's go ahead and pray. God, thank you, Lord, that you are good. God, that despite our difficulties and despite the current situations that we might be in, Lord, if anyone is in this room and is dealing with something, God, we just pray that would be given to you in this moment, Lord. That they wouldn't be afraid to bring that to you, Lord, and that they could just simply surrender that to you, Lord, and remember that you are good. God, we love you and we thank you. We praise your name. Amen.